What could be more reassuring than a beacon of safety? Yet, a lighthouse can hide dark secrets. Echoes that rise out of thin air from another time. Voices that won't be silenced, even in death. Figures who appear suddenly from beyond the grave. Who can explain what lurks in the shadows long after the light goes out? A little more than 100 years ago, on a lonely island off the coast of Maine, two young people began their life together. Today, all that remains is a grisly legend and a ghostly refrain. Seguin Light rises 180 feet above the Atlantic, the highest, most powerful lighthouse in Maine, and one of the oldest, commissioned by George Washington himself. It safely guided thousands of ships past the mouth of the Kennebec River, where the rocks are treacherous and the current swift.
Seguin is a lighthouse that's very, very close to shore, yet it might as well be 1,000,000 miles away because it's on an island, and there's about a mile, mile and a half of water that separates it from the mainland, and it's a very nasty stretch of water.
Most of the year, Seguin is racked by storms or wrapped in fog. Mainlanders say it can drive you crazy.
And there's a delicious story about a couple who lived out there probably around 1850. We don't have any dates, we don't have any names, but we have lots and lots of people who tell different versions.
One warm spring afternoon, a new lighthouse keeper and his bride arrive in the little harbor at Seguin. They seem the perfect couple. She swept away by the handsome keeper. He thrilled by his young bride and his new job. But few brides just out of their teens are prepared for solitude.
I don't think she had any idea what she was about to encounter. I mean, she probably looked out at the island and said, well, that's not far away. I can get home, go to church, visit my family. But reality is fall, winter, early spring, you just don't get off Seguin Island.
While chores keep her husband busy, all she can do is kill time.
Take a delicate person from the mainland and put them out on a place like that. It would be a sin to do it, really, it would. I can see where people would lose their minds.
This type of isolation, for some people, might be what they are looking for and might be something that brings them to grace. And for some people, it might be what brings them to the edge of losing their mind.
Day by day, her mood grows as heavy as the fog. The keeper struggles to save the only woman he'll ever love from slipping away.
He probably noticed her standing on the island looking toward shore longingly and realized that this was very hard for her.
At great difficulty and expense, he brings a piece of the mainland to Seguin, the very thing he believes will cure his wife's misery. Harmony returns to their lives for a time.
The one problem with this piano, though, was it only had one piece of sheet music in it. And this was a woman who couldn't improvise very well. So she ended up playing this one song over and over again.
She was wrapped up in that one little tune. And that one little tune was what was helping her to exist.
She didn't want to be on the island. and she didn't want to be away from the world, and the piano was her connection to the world.
His plan backfires. The piano becomes a broken record.
On and on this infernal song went. So you can imagine her poor husband trying to cope with this and realizing that his wife was slowly but surely going insane.
The frustrated keeper has run out of ideas and patience. From early morning to late at night, the keeper is tormented by the sound of madness. Across the harbor, mainlanders sense all is not right on the island. One night, the woman is playing wilder than ever. Eventually, curiosity got the better of the mainlanders. A suicide, a murder, a mystery. Today, there is no keeper on Seguin Island, and no piano. But on foggy nights, when the wind is just right, a melody still drifts from the solitary cottage, and the past comes back to life. The loneliness of a lighthouse has wrecked more than one marriage and left behind the unexplainable. In the harbor at New London, Connecticut, all is not what it seems. This Victorian mansion looks like the home of a royal family. Except the mansion is a lighthouse, inhabited only by the spirit of a forsaken keeper.
But if you ask anybody about Ledge Light, they can't tell you what year it was built. They can't tell you the architectural style. They can't tell you any of the important details about its career, but they can tell you about Ernie.
You can hear 1,000 different stories about Ernie. Everybody has their own slant on what he does.
A keeper brought his pretty young bride to live with him at Ledgelight. He was twice her age, twice unlucky in love, and determined to make this marriage last. Their first days together were happy, but the honeymoon was soon over. For the young woman, this mansion became a prison. Day after lonely day, she watched ships pass and felt life too passing her by. Then, one evening, a ship stopped, a ferry boat, and the keeper's young wife ran off with the captain. His beautiful wife was the keeper's downfall. Though tragic in life, he became a trickster in death.
Ghosts are notorious for being pranksters. They seem to have a sense of humor.
But he does tricky little things. He steals tools. He rearranges the books on the library shelf.
He turns the foghorn on. He sometimes will clean brass or he'll clean windows.
Once in the 1940s, a keeper's wife actually laid eyes on him. Mostly, he's seen where he lives, in shadows. The doors are bolted, the windows locked, the beacon automated. Today, no one stays at Ledge Light. At least, no one who's alive. Far down the eastern seaboard, on the balmy coast of Georgia, a lighthouse becomes the scene of a crime of passion. With a chilling aftermath. The light of St. Simon's Island towers more than 100 feet above the Georgia coast. Its beauty never betrays the gruesome day in its past. The events of a March morning in 1881 proved again that two's company, but three's a crowd. Lighthouse keeper Fred Osborne and his young assistant are in love with the same woman, Osborne's wife. Osborne puts an end to the fight. Or so he thinks. The assistant pleads self-defense, goes free, and never returns to the scene of the crime. Keeper Osborne will never leave it.
That lighthouse keeper who died in the front yard of the lighthouse keeper's cottage is who we think walks up and down the lighthouse at night.
There's 129 of them going up there, and it's metal, and you can hear them just somebody climbing the stairs. We call out like one of our buddies is coming up, and we don't get an answer. It's kind of eerie, kind of scary sometimes.
His spirit was angry that he was murdered, particularly on duty.
The story begins when the new keeper arrives at St. Simon's and moves his family into the vacant cottage. But as his wife soon discovers, the dwelling is not as empty as it appears. One night, the keeper's wife prepares supper at the foot of the tower, while her husband scans the stormy sea. Strangely, she hears someone climbing the tower. She calls out, but no one answers. Her husband hasn't budged and can't explain the strange sounds. But for decades, people will continue to hear what sounds like a man endlessly searching for something he'll never find.
The ghost has never harmed anybody. It just kind of gives you the willies.
Some ghosts are heard, while others are actually seen. Within sight of the landing place of the Pilgrims, America's oldest wooden lighthouse was built in 1768. Pilgrims called this point of land the Gurnet, after a favorite fish in their homeland. American Indians built their burial grounds throughout the Gurnet, perhaps under the lighthouse itself. The first keeper of the Gurnet Light was John Thomas. Soon after his appointment, he died, and his wife Hannah took over the station. No portrait of her survives, but she's described as strong, hard-working, and wholly devoted to her lighthouse. Hannah tended the light for 2 decades before she died, but some say she never left her post. Professional photographer Bob Shanklin recently was hired to shoot the lighthouse at dawn. He and his wife Sandra were allowed to spend the night at the abandoned station. That night, another woman entered Bob's life, one he came to call My Lady.
It was a chilly evening. I can remember the wind blowing quite strong. Sandra was in bed beside me, and sometime during the night, I woke up here in the bed and sat up and was watching the window light.
For years after her husband died, Hannah Thomas slept alone here in the keeper's quarters.
I was just about the position I'm in now. And the window would light and then go dark, and the window would light, go dark. And I happened to glance over at Sandra right here, and all of a sudden, I noticed My Lady just maybe 18 inches away from Sandra's face. I looked at her, and she looked at me, and the only thing that I could really concentrate on was her eyes. Her eyes were the saddest eyes that I had ever seen. And as I would look at her, I could see the window light and then go dark. And it was either the 4th or the 5th time that the window lit. I glanced towards the window, and when I glanced back, she was gone.
Bob Shanklin says he never saw a ghost in his life till that night.
I know that it wasn't a dream. I know that I was wide awake. I made it a point to let myself know that I wasn't dreaming.
Bob isn't sure who his lady might be. He doesn't even call her a ghost.
I always thought that ghosts were scary, but she wasn't scary, she wasn't spooky. She was just a sad lady.
Rational people swear they've seen ghosts in lighthouses. But sometimes the ghost is the light itself. What happens when an empty lighthouse can't be darkened? When night after night it shines on. No bulb, no power, no explanation. From its beginning in 1830, the stubby white tower of Old Presque Isle was charming to look at, but hard to see. skippers out on Lake Huron complained they could barely see its light. 3 decades later, a taller lighthouse was built a mile to the north. In 1870, the old Presque Isle light was extinguished forever. Or so it was thought. For 100 years, the crumbling lighthouse and cottage lay dormant at the edge of a dark forest of tall cedars. Then, in the 1970s, the historic dwelling was restored and caretakers appointed. Happily married for years, George and Lorraine Paris fell in love all over again with the lighthouse. One of George's first duties was to douse the light. Though struck from the navigational chart, it was still working. The Coast Guard ordered the old light darkened once and for all. George removed the ancient bulb and ripped out the rotting wires. Nothing remained but a dark lens at the top and the hand-chiseled stone staircase. The Parises had all they needed to live happily ever after, and for a dozen years they did. But in the winter of 1992, George suffered a heart attack and died. Alone in the solitary lighthouse, Lorraine decided to stay on.
We loved it here. George and my love is here, and it's always been here.
4 months after George died, something strange happened at the old Presque Isle light.
In May of 1992 is when I first saw it. George passed away in January of 92. May of 92, I saw the light. It was on for about a month before I started telling anybody because I thought I was crazy. Nobody had believed me.
But they did believe her.
There's a light that comes on, and I have seen it, and I know it comes on.
I called the Coast Guard and I said, that light is on, but I said, there's no power and no bulb in it. And he said, Lorraine, you're crazy. I said, no, it's on.
The Coast Guard came and investigated it, and there is nothing there. There's nothing.
It looks like there's a light up in the tower. It's sort of not a real bright light. It looks like a light.
The Coast Guard confirmed the power was cut and the bulb removed, but couldn't explain what people were seeing.
There's a ghost out there.
We've covered the lens inside. We've put plastic all the way around it. The light is still there. That light has guided boats into the harbor. When it's so foggy you couldn't see, people have come in and told me that if it wasn't for my light, they wouldn't be here.
One spring morning, a small boat named Temptation was lost in a dense fog when a crewman spotted the light. The next day, he wrote in Lorraine's log, "The light saved our trip and probably saved our lives."
It doesn't happen every night. It doesn't happen to every boater. They keep asking us why, and we don't have an explanation. I wish I had an answer, but I don't.
Lorraine Paris thinks she does.
He didn't want to leave here. He loved it here. George loved this light more than he did anything else or anywhere else. This was home.
Yeah, it is here. There is a light here. The word is that George is coming back and protecting the lighthouse that he was at for so many years.
I just thought, well, he's here and he's guarding me, and I feel at peace.
Old Presque Isle is the only phantom light on the Great Lakes, but not the only light with a ghost. A salty ex-sea captain once tended a lighthouse for half a century. He loved it so much, he swore he'd never leave. He kept his word. In the late 19th century, shipping on Lake Michigan was booming. One logging town, White River Harbor, was clogged with ships, but had no lighthouse. Local officials petitioned the federal government for a beacon, to no avail. One hard-bitten skipper persisted, single-handedly. Night after night, Captain William Robinson waved his lantern at approaching ships. Eventually, his stubbornness prevailed. In 1875, Captain Robinson became the first keeper of White River Lighthouse. He moved in with his wife Sarah and their children. Robinson loved the lighthouse almost as dearly as he loved his wife. Then, life went dark. Still in her 50s, Sarah Robinson died. The captain was devastated. But his stubbornness kept him going. As his children grew up and left, he threw himself into his remaining passion, the lighthouse. By 1918, William Robinson was the oldest lighthouse keeper in America, and still, at 87, not ready to quit. Then came the worst news since the death of his wife.
The government decided he was getting a bit too old to do the job, and in 1919, he was told that he was to retire.
Retirement meant eviction. A half-century after he fought for the lighthouse to be built, Captain Robinson vowed to stay.
The night before Captain Robinson was to be evicted, essentially, the federal government said, "Your time is up." He laid himself down to sleep that evening and never woke up.
On a black April night, Captain Robinson willed himself to die. Karen McDonald has been director of White River Light Station for 15 years. A former teacher and scientist, she always shrugged off things not explained by the laws of physics. That changed.
I would say that this place is spirited. I would say that Captain Robinson and Sarah are still very much present in the building.
On her very first night in the lighthouse, Karen sensed she wasn't alone.
I was in bed and I had just finished some research. I fell off to sleep for a short while and I woke up to a sound, which was real steady, methodical footsteps. And then as I listened, I heard this intermittent thud sound.
The sounds of a man who walked with a cane.
And it went all the way up to the top of the tower. And then I started hearing these descending footsteps. I felt calmer knowing that it was almost like having a watchdog, almost like having someone survey the place and make sure everything's tidy and ready for the night.
Karen thinks she knows who her ghost is and what he's after.
If we could have a conversation, if it were possible to do so, my sense is that he would say to me, "I like what you're doing here."
Karen's ghost is not only friendly, he has a sense of humor.
There's some playful antics. One of my quirks is to tidy up the frames. And I noticed that in the morning there would be certain photographs that would be off kilter. And they were only angles that could have been created from some other force because there's no other explanation.
No explanation, but a stubborn ghost. A stark contrast to the most haunted lighthouse in America. This is America's most haunted lighthouse. Now empty, some say it echoes with the cries of men who never even set foot here. For 100 years after its construction in 1830, Point Lookout Lighthouse safeguarded this lonely peninsula on the Chesapeake Bay. Except when war came. Point Lookout was no longer lonely and no longer safe. As the Civil War rages, one of the most horrific prison camps on either side is erected just west of the lighthouse. Designed to hold 10,000 Confederates, it's crammed with twice that number. 15 wings radiate from a prison hospital, packed with sick and wounded. Their misery plain to those in the lighthouse. Nothing thrives here save disease. Typhoid, scurvy, dysentery, smallpox. All run rampant, outstripped only by despair.
It would have been quiet. I don't want to call it deathly quiet, but most of these men were away from home. They didn't want to be here. They were hurt. They were suffering. They were homesick. They were depressed.
I can't imagine a place that would lend itself more to being haunted than a place like Point Lookout.
I've been to lots of places that are spiritual, you know, that have an essence of people who have left a part of themselves here, and these men did. They left their arms, their legs, their, in some cases, their fighting spirit right here.
For decades, residents and visitors have seen the unexplainable.
If pain and suffering is something that brings the spirits out, then Point Lookout definitely would be a candidate for the spirits still being here.
I believe that there are spirits that do not know how to move on, or they have some really close tie that they're afraid to let go of and go on.
This certainly would apply to Civil War soldiers, because one of the famous greetings or farewells that Civil War soldiers would say to one another would be, "See you in hell, Johnny. See you in hell, Yank." Maybe they're trying to convince us that it should never happen again.
Bizarre sounds, raspy, desperate voices have been captured on tape.
One of the things that happens that's unexplainable is called EVP, electronic voice phenomena. You don't hear the sound or the voice or the words, but they show up on the audio tape or even a videotape in the sound portion of it.
One November night, historian Michael Humphreys went to the lighthouse with an ordinary tape recorder and a hunch. For over an hour, he heard nothing. Then he played back the tape.
When you pick up the tape recorder and you collect the voices, after the curiosity wears off, you still have something that is, many times will cry for help. So what I try to do is to say a prayer for their soul.
Help me. Help
I believe that these are not just ramblings that are from outer space. And the timing is perfect for comments.
Along with EVP, there is another phenomenon that occurs with cameras. People have taken photographs where you have nothing in the viewfinder, and when the film is developed, suddenly you have a hazy person on that film.
Several years ago, a photo was taken inside the lighthouse. At the edge of the frame appears a hazy figure in the unmistakable jacket, sash, and pants of a Confederate officer.
I was in the room facing the actual corner where the soldier appeared, and there was no soldier standing there.
Laura Berg lived in the lighthouse for 2 years.
We took it to a historian in Annapolis and had it authenticated that it was a Confederate uniform.
When people witness a ghost or some sort of paranormal phenomenon, it seems like it's a rip in time, a tear in the fabric of time, if you will. And all of a sudden you get a glimpse through that and you see something that just can't possibly be, and you wonder about it, then all of a sudden it closes just as quickly as it opened.
There was a lot of strange, unexplained things that I cannot figure out why they happened, how they happened, anything about them. After the first night at Point Lookout, I became a believer.
What she couldn't explain, she could at least preserve. So Laura kept a diary.
October 3rd. Last night around 1 a.m. I was awakened by very loud banging in the attic. It was extremely loud and I have no explanation for it. This morning I heard singing next door. Last night I heard various men's voices when I came in. I did feel that there were soldiers in the house. I would hear groups of men talking on the other side of the wall, and I felt like they were soldiers. There was no human beings over there.
The first man appointed keeper of Point Lookout died before he took command. For 30 years, the job was carried out by his widow, Ann Davis.
I felt that one of the spirits in the house was the spirit of Ann Davis. I did feel like she was always at the top of the stairs. Some people that were visitors to my house saw her.
Helen! Helen!
During overnight visits, Laura's mother, Helen, was repeatedly summoned.
Helen would just be spoken. It wouldn't be yelled, it wouldn't be whispered, much like a live person was calling her name.
Laura learned to live with all her ghosts, except one.
Electricity would go out quite often, and I had to go down to the basement, which to me was the creepiest part of the house. I did see a figure in the basement, and the figure was large. I would feel somebody staring at the back of my neck. It was just a little bit frightening.
Laura isn't the only one who saw someone who wasn't there. Donald Hammett is a 20-year veteran of the Point Lookout Park Police. One day he noticed an elderly woman roaming the grounds.
Noticed she was running her feet through the grass, parting the grass with her feet, and what occurred to me was I thought she had lost something, possibly her car keys or something.
Although it was a warm afternoon, she was bundled in a wool coat with a shawl wrapped tightly around her. When she spoke, her voice too was cold and distant.
And in a real accusatory tone, she said, "I'm looking for the tombstones that are supposed to be here. What did you do with them?"
Hammett started to walk away, then glanced back.
You could tell that she had a personal interest in it. I mean, she said that with conviction of somebody whose tombstone had been disturbed.
That night, he told his story to his supervisor.
Barry walks over to his desk and picks up the very top file that he had just been looking at or working on and hands it to me. And the title of the file was Lost Cemetery, Point Lookout State Park Picnic Area.
A century ago, a lighthouse keeper noted that 5 tombstones in the Taylor family cemetery were in danger of washing into the bay. 4 Taylor children had been buried by their mother, who rested in a 5th grave beside them.
Yeah, there's something going on here. There's just been too much. The photographs, the feelings, the voices. There's something going on.
Far to the south of the Chesapeake, on the stormy Florida coast, stands a lighthouse battered by waves and beset by spirits. America's oldest city is also one of its most haunted. A ghostly presence hangs over St. Augustine, Florida, as thick as Spanish moss. Every night, visitors make the rounds of homes where spirits dwell, stopping at the most spirited place of all.
I want you to meet the ghost of the St. Augustine Lighthouse. Let's go!
Under the looming tower sits the keeper's house, for decades a home to the unexplainable.
This has always been a very spiritual place, a very mystical place.
For years, Dan Holliday lived alone, or almost. He shared the cottage with a little girl who was heard but never seen, until one morning a friend set out to find her.
When he got to the top of the stairs, a little girl was standing in front of that window, looking out.
She kept returning. Once, when another visitor was alone in the house.
He heard a very light tap on the door. And when he went to the door and answered the door, there was the same little girl.
She's always described as a girl of about 12 in a crisp white pinafore with long brown hair. But no child lives in this house, and none has for many years.
Something happened to a little girl in the history of this building.
In 1873, 2 young girls drowned while playing in the surf, the daughters of the man who built the lighthouse. The younger daughter, buried on the lighthouse grounds with her sister, was 12 years old with long brown hair. The little girl isn't the only ghost. St. Augustine's first keeper died suddenly, leaving a wife, 6 children, and a job undone.
The ghost might feel a little more connected to the earth if he knew that he'd left something behind.
A single cold stone marks where Keeper William Harn rests in peace. Or does he? "129 cast iron steps twist up St. Augustine Light. They echo with footsteps of visitors, staff, and a phantom.
This is the watch room where the lightkeeper would stay at night. He would do all his duties from up here. And of course, we stay up here during the daytime and then towards the evening. A lot of times we're actually hearing footsteps coming up and we think it's a customer, so we get all prepared and we get ready to do our little thing. And sure enough, the person never comes up the steps. And so we come over here and we look down, you know, and there's not a soul there.
The soul who isn't there also ventures beyond the tower. "I keep hearing the bloody footsteps crunching in the gravel," one keeper lamented.
I've been here myself at night, you know, hanging out and heard the footsteps and actually, you know, experienced the lights going out on me, that kind of thing. And it is a spooky feeling, you know, when you're up at the top of the tower by yourself.
From the keeper's house to the top of the tower, the unexplained appears.
I saw a man leaning over the rail to the left of the door.
Arriving for work one morning, Kathleen Stewart climbed up to find the man.
Nobody was there. Whoever it was gone. So I think I saw a keeper.
No keeper has lived here in 5 decades.
You want to call that a ghost? Yeah, I call that a ghost.
A 100 years ago, a keeper was painting the top of the tower.
He reached over too far, he had no safety equipment, and he fell. And he was right up here on this northwest corner, and he fell right down and landed right down here. Of course, he was killed instantly. I'm sure that the keeper who fell off the tower is here, his ghost here, and my opinion is that that is the ghost that walks across the gravel and walks up the steps. There was also a man another keeper who hung himself, and I think that is the ghost that people see in the basement.
No one knows who hanged himself or why, but whenever the staff goes downstairs, something crawls up their spine.
Very spooky, yeah, very spooky. Even going in at night to turn on the alarm, I get like, oh, do I have to do this?
Early one evening, Jane Masson went into the basement on an errand. She sensed she wasn't alone.
The figure was definitely large. I would say it would have to have been a male person. And they just moved very slowly past the doorway where I was standing. This St. Augustine Lighthouse thing was the first time I ever actually saw something that I perceived to be a person until I realized that there was no possible way there could be a person.
On a routine check of the basement before heading home, Lighthouse director Kathy Fleming had a glimpse of the unexpected.
It was just after closing. It was in the winter time, and the basement can get pretty dark around that time. I thought, well, you know, we've obviously forgotten someone down here, and I'll just go in and say, hi, sir. We're getting ready to close. Come on out. And there was nobody in there when I walked in. It was completely empty.
In the early 1980s, the keeper's house was struck by lightning. The workers hired to restore it found traces of life amid the ashes.
One man was on a scaffold up here on this level when he felt the presence of someone behind him, and he turned and saw a man hanging from that beam right there.
I believe in ghosts, and I have talked to hundreds of people who believe in ghosts and who say that they have seen ghosts. There's no doubt in my mind that ghosts exist.
Ever since they were lit, these lighthouses have steered men away from danger. Now they harbor restless souls. For us, an empty lighthouse is a mystery where imagination roams free, reflecting things neither hand nor mind can grasp.